Imagine living completely off the grid in the year 1922. Imagine coming home to your isolated farm, surrounded by dark Bavarian forest. You look down at the fresh snow and see a set of footprints leading out of the trees, straight to your door. But when you look for the footprints leaving, there are none. Someone is inside your home. On the evening of March 31st, 1922, 6 people were murdered at a remote farmstead called Hinterkaifeck, about 70 kilometers north of Munich. But the killer didn't flee. For several days afterward, they stayed in the house. They fed the cattle. They cooked meals in the kitchen. They slept in the beds, while the bodies of the people who'd lived there lay stacked in the barn. Over a century later, the case has never been solved. Today, we go through every disturbing detail of the Hinterkaifeck murders and the suspects who got away with it.
To understand this case, you need to understand the family first, because Hinterkaifeck wasn't just an isolated farm. It was a household already carrying a dark secret. Andreas Gruber was 63 years old, the patriarch of the farm, known locally as reclusive, gruff, and difficult to get along with. His wife, Cecilia, was 72. Their daughter, Victoria Gabriel, was 35, a widow, or so everyone believed. Her husband, Karl Gabriel, had reportedly been killed on the Western Front during the First World War, but his body was never recovered. No one had ever actually confirmed his death. 7 years before the murders, the family was at the center of a scandal that shocked the rural community. Andreas and Victoria, father and daughter, were accused of incest. Both were put on trial, and both were found guilty. Andreas served 1 year in prison. Victoria's sentence was shorter. It's believed that Victoria's youngest child, 2-year-old Josef, may have actually been Andreas' son, not Karl's. This single detail would haunt the investigation for the next 100 years. By 1922, the family lived a quiet, secluded life on the farm. Andreas, Cecilia, Victoria, and Victoria's 2 children, 7-year-old Cecilia and 2-year-old Josef.
6 months before the murders, the family's longtime maid, Crescens Rieger, abruptly quit. She packed her bags and left in a panic, swearing the house was haunted. She claimed she'd heard heavy, unexplained footsteps echoing from the attic at night. Andreas dismissed her as superstitious. He shouldn't have. In the weeks leading up to the murders, strange things kept happening. Andreas found a Munich newspaper on the property that he didn't remember buying, and it turned out no one in the area even subscribed to it. Around the same time, he discovered fresh footprints in the snow, leading from the dark tree line straight to the farm's machine shed. There were no footprints leading back out. That same night, the family heard footsteps directly above their heads. Andreas searched the attic. It was empty. Keys to the house began disappearing without explanation. The night before the murders, Victoria fled into the forest after a violent argument inside the house. No one recorded exactly what the fight was about.
On the afternoon of Friday, March 31st, 1922, a new maid arrived at the farm, 44-year-old Maria Baumgartner. Her sister escorted her there and left shortly after. Maria had worked at Hinterkaifeck for less than a day before the murders. She was very likely the last person outside the family to see them alive. Later that evening, investigators believe between 6 and 7 p.m., the killer began. Victoria, her 7-year-old daughter, and her parents were lured into the barn, one by one, through the connecting stable. Investigators believe they may have been drawn out by sounds of the animals, though it was later found that barn noise couldn't actually be heard from inside the house. How exactly the killer got each of them to walk out alone remains unexplained. Each was struck with a mattock, a heavy farming tool with a pickaxe-like blade kept on the property and used by the family themselves. Victoria was struck as many as 9 times. Both she and her mother showed signs of strangulation as well, suggesting the killer may have restrained them before finishing the job with the mattock. The killer then walked into the house. 2-year-old Josef was killed instantly with a single blow to his bassinet. Maria Baumgartner, on her first and only night in the house, was murdered in her bed. The most disturbing detail came from the autopsy. 7-year-old Cecilia did not die instantly like the others. She lay in the hay beside her murdered family for hours, suffering from the shock and trauma of what she'd witnessed. And in her final hours, she tore clumps of her own hair out before succumbing to her injuries.
Most killers run. Whoever did this stayed. At 3 a.m. that same night, a local farmer named Simon Reislander was traveling home near Hinterkaifeck when he spotted 2 figures standing at the edge of the forest. The moment they noticed him, they turned away so he couldn't see their faces. The next night, a craftsman named Michael Pluckel passed by the farm and noticed smoke rising from the chimney. The oven was being heated. Someone inside the house approached him and shined a lantern directly into his eyes, blinding him until he hurried away. On April 1st, 2 coffee merchants, brothers named Hans and Edward Sharofsky, arrived at the farm to take an order, as they regularly did. No one answered the door. They left without thinking much of it. Investigators later found something chilling inside the house. A wall calendar showing the date for April 1st. Someone had deliberately torn off the page for March 31st, the day of the murders. It had to have been done by someone who knew the house, who knew where the calendar was, and who cared enough to keep the date current. The killer fed the cattle, ate food from the family's own kitchen, slept in their beds. For 3 to 4 days, life at Hinterkaifeck appeared, from the outside, almost normal. By April 4th, neighbors had noticed the family's mail piling up, untouched. A neighboring farmer, Lorenz Schlittenbauer, grew concerned and recruited 2 other men, Jakob Siegel and Michael Pohl, to check on the family. Finding the front door locked, the men went to the barn instead, where they discovered the bodies of Andreas, Cecilia, Victoria, and young Cecilia, stacked on top of each other and partially covered with hay and a wooden board. Inside the house, they found Maria and Josef, both killed in their beds. By the time the lead investigator, Inspector Georg Reingruber, arrived from Munich, roughly 45 miles away, dozens of neighbors had already walked through the crime scene. Evidence was trampled. Footprints were destroyed. Some villagers had reportedly even eaten meals in the kitchen while waiting for police. The post-mortem was conducted the following day by Dr. Johann Baptist Allmuller, confirming the mattock as the weapon and the time of death as Friday evening. In a grim, final step, the victims' skulls were removed and sent to Munich, where police consulted a clairvoyant for leads. None were found. Decades later, during the chaos of the Second World War, those skulls were lost entirely. The victims remain buried without them to this day.
Police interviewed more than 100 suspects over the following years. No one was ever charged. Lorenz Schlittenbauer, the very neighbor who led the search party, was, and still is, one of the most suspected names. Some researchers believe he may have actually been the biological father of young Cecilia, tying him directly back to the family's earlier scandal. Witnesses also noted he walked through the crime scene strangely calm, even moving evidence before police arrived. Then there's Carl Gabriel, Victoria's husband, supposedly killed in the war. His body was never found. Could he have returned secretly to find his wife's child was actually his father-in-law's? Other theories point to a traveling killer altogether, with no connection to the family at all. In 2007, a group of police academy students re-examined the case using modern forensic methods. They claimed to have identified a likely suspect, but chose never to name them publicly, out of respect for the family's living descendants. In 1923, the farm itself was demolished, in part to stop the property from becoming a grim tourist attraction. Today, only a small memorial marks where Hinterkaifeck once stood. More than 100 years later, the killer's identity and the reason for it all remains buried with them.